So I mentioned that this last few days, this is like outreach season on campus. And so it's like the last few days have been full of those initial conversations. So it's one of those things where this might be actually, I think what I mentioned, the first mass of every single school year, is just how many times we have the same conversation over and over again. It's like, hi, what's your name? Where are you from? What's your major? Did you play any sports? Did you play any instruments? What did you basically, it's, we give each other our resumes. And that's kind of like, it's been like the last few days have been constantly just like exchanging resumes where you're just telling people, which is fine. I guess it makes sense, right? It's better than, it's a little less uncomfortable than, hi, what's your name? So what are your biggest regrets in life? Like that would be maybe uncomfortable. Or what are you most deathly afraid of? Are there any fears you have going on? What are your insecurities? You have to start somewhere. And I think starting with a resume is not the worst thing in the world because it's a place to start, and because it's true. It's the things that are true about a human being. I think, when you get to know someone, it makes sense. We start with the resume. But then what happens is our time in college, our time in life, just all of our time essentially is spent building the resume. And so we go back to this thing of like how we introduce ourselves, we lead with the resume, but then it turns out that we end up living for the resume. So what are the accomplishments? What are the achievements? What are the things that I can say after my name? Are the things that I've done, the things that I've lived for, the things that I've earned. And I think that's not bad, but how sad would it be? Like how tragic would it be if that was all you were remembered for? Like what's on the resume? I was going through this. I was kind of like looking up, like what would Elon Musk's resume be? Like, okay, he founded SpaceX, and there was like 30 things that aren't on his resume that was on some website, and he had an ROI of a company for 130 billion. That he would, if he died today, he would die, this amount of money wealthy. And I thought, that's just, again, how empty it would be if at someone's funeral, at Elon Musk's funeral, they just stood up and they said, these are all the things that he did. These are all his achievements. These are all his accomplishments. This is how much he was worth when he died. It's kind of like, if you got someone's funeral and they said, what I can say about him is his max back squat was such and such a weight. Or what we know about her is, she held her ideal weight till the very end. Or that even at 65, he still looked 50. Like, these are things that we're living for, right? These are things that so many people are preoccupied with. And how empty would it be if that's the only thing that someone could say at our funeral? I think because anyone can get up and read a resume at a funeral. But only someone who really knows you can get up and give the eulogy. Not just like, well, what did she do? What did he do? But who was she? Not just what were their accomplishments, but what were they like? And it's crazy, again, because too many of us, again, we lead with the resume. And we live for the resume. But we're left with the eulogy. That's all we have in the end, right? And there's a man named David Brooks. He wrote a book called The Road to Character, and he talks about this. He talks about how so many of us, we live for what they call resume virtues. He calls resume virtues. The things that we put on a resume. But then we're remembered for our eulogy virtues. And what we're going to do is actually, we're starting a new series. This weekend, we're starting a new series. Because we want to begin with the end in mind, right? Because too many of us, we lead with the resume virtues and we live for the resume virtues, but we're left with the eulogy virtues. And so if we begin with the end in mind, the idea of like, okay, I'm starting the semester, maybe I'm starting my whole career in college, maybe wherever you're at in life right now, okay, I'm taking this next step. And this next step is towards where? Like, what's it aiming for? Because most of us, again, are living for the resume virtues, but we're left with the eulogy virtues. And so we're starting this series, and this series is on eulogy virtues. It's what the things that we're left with, the things that hopefully the people that we love, the people that know us, hopefully the things they remember about us, hopefully at the end of our lives, regardless of how short or how long our lives are, the things that are true about us. And the first virtue that we want to talk about today is in the book of Sirach. Actually, Jesus even mentions it in the gospel today. In Sirach, he starts it off by saying, conduct your affairs with humility. So I want to talk about that. We want to focus on the eulogy virtue of humility today, because I think we have a lot of us have a false view of humility. We have the view of humility of like the person who's like, oh shucks, like they can't like receive a compliment without protesting. They can't receive a gift without kind of like saying that they don't deserve this gift. We sometimes, C.S. Lewis talks about it like this. He says, sometimes we have it in our minds that the humble man and the humble woman that involves this. It involves a beautiful woman trying to convince herself that she's not that beautiful, or a intelligent man trying to convince himself that he's not that clever. Because that's what being humble is, right? We have that kind of image. That's actually what he calls, and what essentially we would call, false humility. But too many of us, we fall into this view of false humility because we don't know what true humility looks like. I would say this very, very simply. Humility is nothing more than honesty. Humility is nothing more than being willing to acknowledge the truth. So being willing to acknowledge the truth about ourselves. That yes, there are some things that I'm bad at. There are some things I'm good at. The humble person will actually tell the truth. The humble person is the honest person. The humble person is willing to say, yeah, these are my victories, these are my strengths, and these are my weaknesses, and these are my failures. They don't have to tell everybody that, but they at least have to acknowledge that for themselves. And because of that, this is the next thing. The humble person is not merely honest. The humble person is also grateful. Why? Because in every moment, the honest person knows there's always someone to thank. For every gift that comes into a humble person's life, the honest person's life, the honest person knows that this gift didn't just come to me because I deserve it. There's always someone to thank. So here, the humble person is honest. The humble person is grateful. And those things are great. I think those are really big qualities. But here's the thing. The problem is this. Sirach says this. Sirach says, conduct your affairs with humility, and you will be loved more than a giver of gifts. And that got me thinking a lot about this. And I thought, wait, okay, so we love honest people. That's fine. And maybe we love people who are grateful. That's a good thing too. But love more than a giver of gifts. I started thinking like, wait, so when was the last time that I liked the person who said thank you more than the person who actually gave the thing that they were thanking for? Like never. So instead, so I thought there must be something more in the humble person, more than just someone who's willing to be honest, more than someone who's just willing to be grateful. And I think there's another aspect to the humble person that we don't notice because it's so normal. And C.S. Lewis says it like this. He says, don't imagine that if you met a really humble person, that he'll be what most people call humble these days. He will not be a sort of greasy, smarmy person who's always telling you that, of course, he's nobody. Probably, all that you will think about him is that he seemed to be a cheerful, intelligent chap who took a real interest in what you said to him. If you do dislike him, it will be because you feel a little envious of anyone who seems to enjoy life so easily. He will not be thinking about humility. He will not be thinking about himself at all. That line of, like, what's the mark of a humble person? Well, they took a real interest in what you said. Think about this. Think about anyone you walked away from a conversation with someone and you're like, I like that person. Why? Probably it wasn't because they dazzled you with their stories. Probably it wasn't because they entertained you. Probably because they just listened to you. I don't know how many times I can say I will walk away from a conversation and think, I love her, I love him. And why? And someone says, because they laughed at all your jokes, dummy. Like, I'm like, that's why. Isn't this crazy? We do this. Someone who's just willing to be interested in us and just willing to listen to us, ask questions, and want to know us. They took a real interest in us. We love them. That is the mark of a humble person. How so? They simply pay attention. This is it. The humble person is someone who has the ability to pay attention. Rick Warren, he's a pastor out in California. He took what C.S. Lewis had written and he put it in his own words. He said, listen, we have to realize humility is not thinking less of yourself. Again, it's not thinking, I'm nobody, I'm some poor schmuck when you're not. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. The person who thinks of themselves less is free to pay attention to whoever's in front of them. That's like a superpower. That is, okay, go back over the last, well, for us, we are the mission team and the focus team and everyone here. Over the last few days, how many times we and our students on campus have been in conversations, these new interactions with people, these people, times where we're exchanging resumes with people. how many times those interactions, those brief conversations or in-depth conversations were ruined because I kept thinking, like, how am I coming across? How am I coming across? How am I doing right now? How am I doing? That this interaction is ruined because I'm thinking, what are they thinking about me right now? That I couldn't pay attention to the person in front of me because I was too distracted by the person inside of me. You ever have that situation where, right, it's just I don't have the ability to pay attention to you because I'm too preoccupied with me. But the humble person is not thinking less of themselves, they're thinking of themselves less. That's why I think that if I just tell myself, okay, in this conversation, just be humble, okay, listen to them, just be humble, doesn't work. But how about this? Pay attention. Pay attention. Be interested in them. That seems to work. In fact, this woman named Tara Brack, she said, attention is the most basic form of love. Just giving someone your attention is the most basic form of love. There's no simpler form, there's no clearer form of actually caring for someone than simply giving their attention. Years ago, I was talking with this couple, and they were recounting one of their first big fights that they ever had as a couple. What happened was, she came over to his house, and he's a computer guy, so he was playing video games. And she walks in, he's like, hey, how you doing? Great. And so they're having a conversation. He's still playing his video game. And she didn't mind that. And he said, how was your day? She starts telling him about her day. And he's like, he's interacting, like he's playing the video game, but he's listening. And at one point, she's talking, and he gets up from the video game, and he goes into the kitchen to get something to eat. And he goes into the kitchen, and she stops talking. And he realizes, he was a pretty smart guy, he realizes very quickly when she stopped talking, when he went to the other room, that something was wrong. And so he said, what's wrong? And she didn't respond. And so he sheepishly walked out of the kitchen back into the living room, and what's wrong? And she said, I was talking and you just walked away. And he was like, yeah, but I was still listening to you. And that began the first big fight of their relationship. They recounted to me, but there was a great conclusion that came out of this fight, a great resolution that came out of this fight. And it was this. It was, whenever we see each other, after we haven't seen each other for a long time, we've committed to each other that we're going to have at least 15 minutes of what they called eyeball time. Where whatever you're doing, when you get a chance, put it down, and we're gonna have just 15 minutes of eyeball time, just simply paying attention to each other. I came across a post, I don't know how long ago it was. Someone had said, on my 5th year wedding anniversary, I've discovered that 80% of marriage is simply shouting, what, from the other room. Because that's this recognition that even people who love each other so much, we don't often pay attention to each other. But Sirach would say, conduct affairs with humility, and you'll be loved more than a giver of gifts. Why? Because when someone does that, when someone pays attention, we remember them. That's why humility is a eulogy virtue, because it's what's remembered. I think in the course of my life, I've met at least 2 people who are likely to become canonized saints. I met a lot of holy people, but I think these 2 people are likely to become canonized saints. One of them is a man named Father Thomas Dubé. Father Thomas Dubé was a priest. He was a teacher and an author. He used to travel the world giving retreats and seminars and just teaching all over the place. At one point, when I was 1 year ordained a priest, I was up in Hibbing, Minnesota. Father Dubé came to our parish, and I had read all of his books. You know, he's an old man by that point, and he was preaching all day on a Saturday. And he asked me if I could drive him over to the rectory during lunch because he just wanted to rest his voice, an old guy. And I said, sure, no problem. So I drove him to the rectory. And while he was eating, I went up to my room, and I had a Nordic track, a Nordic little cross-country ski machine. So I get on this for like half an hour, and I come down, and he was like, what was that? And I was like, because I thought he was this is the holy guy, right? This is the really impressive, big-time author, teacher, speaker, whatever. I was like, oh, he said, was that a treadmill? I was like, oh, it's like a ski machine kind of a thing. And he's like, that's amazing. You did that all on your own? I'm like, well, yeah, I was the only one up there. He's like, did you go at least 10 minutes? I was like, well, it was like, I don't know, half an hour. A half an hour? Wow. And he just had all these questions. He wanted to know about, like, what's it like? And are you training for something? And that's fascinating. And I was just like, I am so, he's not getting anything out of this conversation other than finding out about me and my exercise habits. Later on that night, the pastor and the senior associate and I took him out to dinner. Sorry, the pastor took the 3 of us out to dinner. And He had written this book called The Evidential Power of Beauty. It is definitely 10 out of 10, would recommend. Super good. And one of the chapters of The Evidential Power of Beauty is a chapter on music and how music can be beautiful, but music can be ugly too. And so I just asked him a question about this chapter, showing how intelligent I was. And his response, I kind of challenged, I was a little precocious, I think. I kind of challenged one of his points. And he listened and he said, wow, yeah. Well, I got that from so-and-so. That was someone else's idea that I brought into my book. But what do you think about that? And I thought, I am an infant priest at this point. I don't have a right to have an opinion to anything. I thought about this once because I read it once in your book. You have given your entire life to this kind of thing. And he actually was interested in what I had to say. I've read almost every one of his books. I've listened to almost every one of his published talks. That's what I remember. That this guy, this man, who had everything to teach me, was interested in what I had to say. That's why this paying attention, that's why humility is a resume virtue. Of course, you could say, well, that's a tactic. He didn't want to argue with you. He got out of the argument. Or even just, think about this. If humility, people are humble, are loved more than givers of gifts, well, maybe then just be humble and you'd be charming. If you're humble, then you get your way. If you're humble, you can manipulate people. And maybe that's why you should be humble. Maybe that's why you should pay attention to people. You can make friends and influence people, and that's how you can live. Jesus cuts through that. In the gospel, in the parable, Jesus says some kind of confusing words. In the parable, Jesus says, when you throw a dinner, when you host a party, when you host an event, don't invite your relatives and friends. Keep in mind, when Jesus has a parable, it's not a general rule. He's making a specific point. So if you ever get the point where you have Thanksgiving dinner, you get to invite your family. What Jesus is saying is, when you invite someone, invite people who can't pay you back. Like when you do things for others, make sure you do them for people who can't pay you back. When you pay attention to people who can't pay you back. It's the reason why we call it paying attention. It's because it costs something. It costs us something to pay attention. And I think that when Jesus is telling us you have to be humble, you have to pay attention to people, one of the things that he's saying is you have to pay attention to people who other people say don't matter. Just pay attention to the people who are right in front of you. Because they're worth your attention. So this is the last thing. As we continue this series on eulogy virtues this week, my invitation is grow in the eulogy virtue of humility. So simply. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. It's having the freedom inside to not be distracted or preoccupied by me so that I can pay attention to the person in front of me. So I'd say this, do this by simply paying attention. To whom? Well, to the person who won't pay you back. Pay attention to the person who can't pay you back. I think start by paying attention to the person who's simply in front of you. When we meet new people, we lead with the resume virtues, and too many of us live for the resume virtues. But at the end of our lives, we're left with what really matters. At the end of our lives, we're left with the eulogy virtues.
You don't have to be mean. You don't have to stay close. As long as you're somewhere out there, that's enough for me. I don't need to hold you near me, don't need promises to keep. Just the thought that you are breathing somewhere in this world I see. Even if I'm not beside you, even if you never know, there's a quiet kind of comfort just in knowing you still glow. I don't need forever. I just need you to exist. You don't have to stay with me. You don't have to feel the same. Just as long as you're still out there, calling softly through my days. You don't have to look my way. You don't have to be my home. It's enough to know you're living in a world I'm not alone. I won't chase you through the distance, won't disturb your chosen life. I'll just keep you in my silence, like a star that shines at night. Through the dark and through the blue, I still think of you. You don't have to stay with me. You don't have to feel the same. Just as long as you're still out there, calling softly through my days. You don't have to look my way. You don't have to be my home. It's enough to know you're living in a world I'm not alone. I don't need to be your light. I don't need to cross your mind. All I need is just the truth that you're somewhere still alive. You don't have to stay with me. You don't have to feel the same. Just as long as you're still out there, calling softly through my days. You don't have to look my way. You don't have to be my home. It's enough to know you're living in a world I'm